Okay, so let's move into the special education process. I am going to work with the new IEP that is coming out, since schools will be using it starting September. Some districts are already using the new forms, but there's a reason why I'm going to use the new form, just because the old form is only good for a couple of more months. So really, the new form, just as why we're doing a new form, is that they really wanted to strengthen, DESE wanted to strengthen the IEP process, make it more of a conversation so that families and students could work with their school team and have a better understanding of what's going on, in hopes that that will improve the educational outcomes. And that it will support the students with disability. It's also really driven by student strength and student voice. So that is really important to be able to get that across in the IEP. So this is the new form in the first page. The student, it's, as you notice, it doesn't say parent concerns, it says student and parent concerns. So regardless of the age of the student, this is not, people look at this and they think, oh, transition age. This is not just transition age. A fifth grader can tell you what they want to do when they grow up. It may not seem realistic, but that's not for us to judge. That is what their vision is. And we know that if I was doing what I thought I would do in fifth grade, I'd be a veterinarian and I wouldn't be here. So, except for the part of putting down animals, that just bothered me. And so I could not be a veterinarian. But so it really focuses on the student's current. If you ask a student what their favorite class is, they usually can list that out. A lot of times it's recess. But if you ask them which is the class they have the hardest time with, there's usually some challenge or some deficit that they're struggling with. So that can be an area of concern for even a student that young. That what is it that they are concerned about? And also the student's vision. I know this is kind of hard, a little hard to see. It asks for the ages of 3 to 13-year-olds. This year they want to learn what? The next question is, by the time I finish with either elementary or middle school or such, I want to. So it gives them a perspective of looking at what do they want to learn this year and what do they want to learn as they get older. So they're looking at that 5-year period that we have. And then there's the rest of the questions here are 14 to 22. And then comes the team's vision. So you will see much less of the team would like Jose to acquire proficiency in non-preferred activities. You'll see less of that because there'll be more of the student's vision. And that is important, particularly for the students with trauma history, because you want the rest of the IEP to carry over that statement. You can find the IEP, the new form, at this link here. I've sent a PDF to Amanda, which she's going to mail out to everybody. And in that PDF, that is a hyperlink so that you can go ahead and pull it up. It is available in 16 different languages besides for English. So it'll be interesting. I was telling Amanda, I have a training tomorrow night on the new IEP for a Vietnamese community in Massachusetts, and I do not speak Vietnamese. There we will be working with the Vietnamese version that I have to in my head translate to what it is in the English version, but you can take a look at it right there. So again, we're looking at what are the what's the vision, what are the dreams of the student, and that really is going to play out. I'm jumping really quickly for a lot of students. They may have academic challenges, But that may not necessarily be true, again, depending on each individual student. But they would come under behavioral, social, and emotional, because a student with trauma history has an emotional disturbance. So this would be looking at what can they do both in an academic achievement or in a functional performance. And it's asking really briefly for describe the current behavior, social or emotional performance, consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies to address the behavior that impedes learning. So if they're having behavioral issues that are taking them out of the classroom, or out of the learning environment of any time, they're not accessing the curriculum. So therefore that behavior is something that you want to take a look at. But you also want to look at areas such as relationships, their relational development with students in their class, in the school. Are they part of the life of the school? All of that you want to have it carried out to. And the second area, the second box here, shows the strengths of the students and how to carry out. Here would be what's the current level of performance. Here are strengths and preferences, and then it plays out how do these play out in impacting the students' disability or social emotional disability at this point. So that breaks down the present level. There's a section here on bullying and autism. We won't go over those, but the next section would be the measurable annual goals. And we're going to take a look at to see how a goal of, let's say, self-regulation might be the goal area. What's the baseline? What can the student currently do? And I like that they now call it the baseline, because too often the goals are not measurable because they don't have a baseline data in them. So this is a place to be able to put a data. How often can the student do what it is that we're looking at them doing? What's the goal that we're going to reach out for here? What's the measurement? How will it be measured to know if the student has made any advance in that goal? How will it be measured? The schedule of how often a measurement will be taken. I mean, the measurement may be class observation from the special ed teacher and the adjustment counselor. How often is that going to be taken? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? And then who actually are going to be the people responsible for it? So this information will end up on the service delivery grid, but right now it breaks it down here. And then here are the objectives and benchmarks that would break down into what the student would be working on in order to achieve that goal. So here's an example that of how goals can be restated. Just a quick example of that. So Mark lacks self-regulation skills. You can revise that to say something like, Mark has difficulty regulating during class, resulting in frequent interruption. Or Mark relies on ineffective communication techniques to help self-regulate during instruction. It gives more depth to what we're looking at. And we're going to actually go through and do one of these in a moment. But we want to take a look at, identifying triggers. These are some possibilities. Increasing predictability. So it's easier for the student to be able to know what's going to happen next. Provide opportunity to assist others that allows them to be part of the classroom, part of the environment, to build some peer supports. So what are some goal areas that could be included in an IEP with a trauma history? I just want you to take a minute and think about that. And then if you would put your answers in the chat. See, this is the part where you have to do the work and I get to take a drink. So any thoughts on goal areas? Building self-regulation skills, increase the amount of time the student spends in the classroom and focus attention. And both of those last two can be two separate goals. I find many times that you end up with a social emotional goal, which actually can be broken down to specific goals. A student will interact with one peer at recess without conflict. That's great. That's a measurable goal. Um, so that is helpful. Anyone else? Students will use tools from their toolbox appropriately. Absolutely. Identify and utilize 3 strategies to reduce anxiety. Excellent. So let's take a look. Do we have any questions about those right now? So we'll get back to some of those. There is a list, and I will actually include this for in the resources. There are lists that you can find about things like alternatives to conflict and self-awareness, emotion regulation, which also have ideas for benchmarks and things like that and objectives. So, any questions before I move on? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about resilience, and building resilience within schools, of ways we can do that. Um, this is from Dr. Bruce Perry, kind of one of my idols, who talks about the 5 R's of resilience. Relationship is huge, because without having that relationship, it would be very hard to be able to build off of any of these things. So routines, as much as a student who any student doesn't say they don't like routines, kids thrive on it. And you can ask many parents how difficult breaks can be, vacations and things like that, because it's very hard to be able to create the structure in the routine that happens in school. You have a schedule in school. It's hard to have that schedule at home. It's hard to have routines. They'll fight against it, but they do much better when having routines. So I always like to say, if you know, if you're professional working with students, and you know that you're going to be out on Thursday because you have a dentist appointment, let the class know that you're going to be out so that the student is not thrown for a loop when a substitute comes in, somebody that they don't know. It actually is more helpful for them and makes the job easier for the substitute coming in. Create rewards, we call brain fertilizers, that can be easily accessible by the adults in the room, be it the paraprofessional, be it the teacher, be it the cafeteria lady. These rewards of praise really can start to build a student's self-esteem. It's like somebody notices me and someone notices good things about me. So, when I am in an IEP meeting, I make sure that the team goes around and everybody has to, label off a strength that the student is good at. Particularly, I make the students sit in the room during that time frame, so that's important. Reading, whether it be as a family activity, as a school activity, it's an activity that helps build student sense of community, but it also boosts them up. As long as they are not struggling with a reading disorder, it can be very helpful for them to do something that is beneficial to other students. Many students like to be able to, if they're like 4th, 5th grades, they like to read stories to the kindergarten kids. because it just gives this sense of empowerment for them. And rhyming is huge. When a child is dysregulated, getting them to rhyme or do something in rhythm will help regulate them. We are born in rhythm. We are listening to the heartbeat, the rhythmic heartbeat of our mom while we're in utero. We come out, and once we're born, what's the first thing somebody does when they're trying to regulate a baby who's crying is you rock them. And it's part of that rhythm, rocking, being in a rocking chair or a glider, being able to move back and forth, saying their name or counting to 1, 2, 3 repeatedly. All those things help regulate a student without necessarily having to put much work into it. So it's something that can be part of the student's toolbox. This is one of my favorite videos. I love this teacher. I can't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning, but this guy has an incredible memory and knows his students. So bear with me for a second.
In this room, we're going to be here. This is like now. What do you mean? I would say if I put the lights down right here. Is this great to see you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You ready, Chef? I don't know if you're ready. You ready? All right, what you got?
So I love that video. He has remembered and individualized with every single student a different movement that welcomes them, that says, I see you, I accept you for who you are and how you want to present. And that's a great way to start off the day with them. So it's definitely something that, not to say that I recommend that, because since I can't remember what I ate for breakfast, I could not remember to do that. But many teachers do something similar to that. And that can help greatly with the rapport that they build with the teacher. So they want to be able to have the teacher acknowledge them. They also want to do things positively so that the teacher will have they will please the teacher. But it also builds community, that everybody in that group did something similar. And that goes to speak to the sense of belonging, that they're a classroom. Building a strong sense of trust and caring relationship with at least one adult can be huge. Like I say, nurses are great for doing that. Work with the students, the child's island of competency. What are they good at? What are they interested in? So if a student is interested in baseball, you can tie a lot of subject matter into baseball. Have the subject of math be about the numbers and statistics of a baseball game. You can have them read stories about baseball players. You can, all these things that you could do in different subjects that you can, in physics, you can deal with the velocity of a ball and angles. And so there are a lot of things you can do with their islands of competency, because they'll not only appreciate and enjoy what they're doing, it will now become a preferred activity, but it also nurtures their talents. As the student gets older, it's a way to be able to say, if a student is good at statistics but is not good at sports, Get them engaged and do a um, possibly be a statistician for the football team or the baseball team, keeping scores, help be a manager, those things that can keep them part of the community. Engagement in community group or a cause is a good thing, because again, it's helping them be some part of something bigger than themselves. So that is something that can be extremely beneficial. These are different ways to help co-regulate the child. Lowering your voice. We have mirroring neurons in our brain that we will match what's happening in our environment. So if you speak calmly, it's more likely to get a child to speak calmly. If you hold your body a certain way, it will get them to be able to do that. Lowering your body position puts you eye to eye with a student and makes it more connective. Students can take a walk outside. Surprisingly, doing heavy work or pushing things. Having a student push against a wall, actually the use of the muscles will actually burn off some of that cortisol and adrenaline that they have. So that's one way to actually get them to deregulate, not deregulate, to re-regulate themselves. Model deep breathing. This sometimes can be really challenging. It's almost like telling somebody who is not calm to calm down. It has the opposite effect to them. Because that's probably the worst way to get somebody to calm down is to tell them to calm down. But telling a student to breathe deeply sometimes can be really challenging. Bubble liquid is God's gift as far as I'm concerned. I have had teachers who keep a bottle of bubble liquid in their desk and they have the whole class line up and kids come up and they try and blow either the biggest bubble they can or the most bubbles they can. And in doing that a couple of times, it actually forces all the air out of your lungs and then a large intake. Doing that several times actually you can get a child to regulate their breathing by doing that. Sometimes it's a matter of just not talking and letting them letting the student have some quiet time and some silence. There's nothing wrong with that. When in doubt, move together. Marching is another rhythmic way of getting kids to regulate themselves. So if they're going to go between, say, the classroom and the cafeteria, the best way to regulate themselves doing that is by marching to the cafeteria. So these are things that can be done depending on the age of the student. I think one of the best things that you can do is educate yourself on becoming trauma sensitive and trauma informed. Making sure that all assessments of the student are trauma informed, that you're looking at the student as possibility of a trauma student, a student who's suffered from trauma, so that you've covered your basis and you don't necessarily need to know whether a student has trauma or not. I actually am someone who is not a proponent of having any information about a student's trauma on their IEP or in their evaluations. And I say that because I've actually had the experience one time of working with an adult who'd been an advocate for 20 years and was working with a student in DCF custody that was at a collaborative school, and the school had no parent concerns. They had no strengths in the evaluation section, but under disability, they had listed that the 8-year-old had a sexually transmitted disease. So they basically, and the student did not know that. So the whole IUP was rejected and the whole thing had to be rewritten. But that's why you don't need to know what the specific traumas were for somebody to be trauma informed. And it's also helpful that everybody who works with the students, be it therapists, counselors, the gym coach, everybody knows and is aware of the fact that there are students in the school who have trauma histories. And if you deal with all the kids as they do, you've covered your bases. I recommend that people check out what their own trauma history is. There are several apps that you can go ahead and do that, or ACEs Too High has the questions, the ACE questionnaire on there. They also have a questionnaire for resilience on there. So making sure that the IEP is trauma informed through all domains, and to be really careful about secondary trauma. When working with a student who has a trauma history, it can be very draining, and you can struggle with secondary trauma yourself. So self-care, that oxygen mask on the airplane is something that I highly, highly recommend for any professionals working with students with a trauma history. I love this quote. It's not our job to toughen our children to face a cruel and heartless world. It's our job to raise children who will make the world a little less cruel and heartless. So thank you all for joining today. I've tried to leave a little bit of time for any questions that you might have, or comments, recommendations. And now's the time for that.